You're welcome along to Thursday's football show. It is, well, Arthur's like, it's not a football show anymore, it's just football on a Thursday. Dan McDonnell is in studio. How are you?
Yeah, I don't know how to define these things, but either way, we're talking
football.
Yeah.
Well, what it means is we have scope to go wherever we want.
We're just going to live.
If we feel like doing a live golf, another hour of live golf, I just did an hour and a half of it in Golf Weekly earlier.
Yeah.
But I feel like I have more to offer.
I mean, is there anything left to say? I mean, probably something else will probably happen.
I don't want to link the two things together, but today is a bit of a landmark day for football in Ireland. The FAI today launched their facility investment vision and strategy, where they are looking for €863 million over the next 15 years to focus on grassroots, 426 million of it, the League of Ireland, 390 million of it, and the international game, 47 million of it. The only place you get money like that these days is from the Saudis.
Yeah, I mean, that's the simple solution. You know, I mean,
did anyone bring it up?
No, it was an aberration. You know, I mean, yeah, I mean, where would our morals all go then? I mean, that is the broader debate, isn't it, with all of this? Well, it's like, more than anything, like, it just goes to show it's massive money, and yet in the context of modern sport, it's not, which is the weird thing, like, you know, I mean, and we're so conditioned maybe to like low enough investment in the sport on this island, to be honest, you know, relative to even, you know, the European average, which is a big point that the FAI have made in their presentation. So yeah, I mean, for some people this is like, how much a year? What, 57 a year, 34 a year from government? Yeah, sure, listen, that's
a mid-table Premier League footballer.
Yeah, I mean, geez,
and like what we're talking about here, over 15 years and €863 million will be an unprecedented investment in Irish football.
Yeah, something
that would change the game forever in this country.
Yeah, I mean, I think transform the game is a phrase that's used, and yeah, you would believe that would be the case. It's heavily front loaded as well. So, I mean, most of this would be in the next decade, and the timelines are a little bit unclear as to when it would kick off. Because I mean, this is, and we'll go into all of this. Obviously, I mean, this is a proposal. This is not the plan that's happening. It's a proposal to be put on the table, and as we know with all of these things, they can change. But it's an indicative figure for what they believe will be necessary, because ultimately what this has come out of is an audit. You know, the FAI did a strategy plan, whenever that was, a couple of years ago, and probably got a little bit of a cool response, you know, and a big part of it probably was, well, you know, the elephant in the room here, or the obvious issue here, is like the facilities are dreadful, and it's something that you hear referenced, you know, people, Damien Duffel referenced them casually, and we can all reference them casually from our own experiences that we've lived and seen, and we all sort of agree, yes, the facilities are terrible, but I suppose it's an open-ended statement, and what the audit was probably all about was to, well, let's actually look, let's create a document with facts around this, you know, and then, okay, there's recommendations that are subjective, people can debate them, but I suppose the bottom line aspect is the facts of, you know, and it's right down to the idea of how many pitches do we have, how many do we need, you know, dressing room facilities, toilet facilities, particularly for females, and when you step it up to levels, you know, League of Ireland wise, it's, I mean, the stadiums are terrible. I suppose you can see that with your eyes, but again, just laying out just how bad they are with regard to European norms. And the international element that you mentioned at the start is to do with the facilities in Abbottstown for underage international teams and senior team where they train. So there's a broad scope to it, but I suppose people have always said, well, you know, where is the plan? And this is the plan now, and we can debate the plan, but at least now there is one, which was the most important step, whereas talking about it for years without a plan just sounds like noise, sounds like complaining, whereas now it's like, okay, this is a document that's a guideline for where things could go.
It is a very extensive document, and we'll get into the various parts over the next few minutes. Today then, out in Abbottstown, Roy Barrett, who's the outgoing FAI chairman, and the FAI CEO Jonathan Hill were there. Let's hear from Jonathan Hill. He lays out the scale of underinvestment in Irish football and how it's impacted the game from grassroots right up to international level.
Our research clearly demonstrates that Irish football needs funding, both private and public, to transform our facilities and infrastructure and to inspire current and future generations. We believe that football has been underinvested in for the last 25 years and that we've fallen behind our European counterparts in facilities investment. This isn't the fault of any single entity, but it is a simple fact. That is evidenced by the stark findings from our facilities audit. So, for example, at grassroots level, many clubs do not have any form of community-focused clubhouse, and only 10% of our grassroots clubs have access to an indoor hall, for example. As a further example, take women's and girls football, which has grown steadily in recent years. The reality is that this will suffer if we do not invest in facilities now, as we'll not be able to cater for this ongoing demand and growth. Again, as an example from the survey, we now know that 38% of our grassroots clubs do not offer female toilet facilities. Whilst the League of Ireland is currently thriving with sold-out stadia and an increasingly strong on-field product, the state of our facility infrastructure is clearly holding the league back. Facilities are below standard both in terms of our academies and wider training facilities, whilst many of our stadia have not seen significant investment for over 20 years. At international level, the FAI does not have a modern, fit-for-purpose National Football Centre facility, with the current FAI National Training Centre not at comparable standards to facilities in other European associations. In our current facility, there are no changing room for players across 18 international teams, or indeed for any of our young local players, for our match officials or staff. No high performance, no medical, and no modern sports science facilities. We believe this needs to be addressed.
That is Jonathan Hill, the FAI CEO, speaking at the launch today of the FAI's Facility Investment Vision and Strategy. One of the things that I liked about this is right at the start they show football's social return on investment, and this maybe is the start of football fighting back, of shouting loudly that too often they've allowed other sports to almost have a monopoly on volunteerism and benefits to the community, where you only have to look at the makeup of the Irish underage squads right now to see the integration that's happening in football at a far greater rate than other sports, and the numbers involved in that across the social benefits, the economic benefits, and the health benefits as well, which probably gets into where they will look for the money to come from all different angles within government. Those numbers that Jonathan Hill went through there, and we'll start at the grassroots level, I don't think will be shocking to anybody who is involved at football at grassroots level, at any age group, at senior age, whatever. Like 10% of teams have access to an indoor facility. I'm surprised it's even that high. Like, it's a miracle that we've had any success at underage level, that participation is so high, considering how far behind it seems Ireland are in terms of those most basic facilities.
Yeah, well, I think the general sort of calculation here, I mean, there's a number of figures you can pick off. I mean, I think they estimate like you actually need another 1,000 pitches if you were in line with I suppose per capita reports based on other countries, and a lot of the pitches that are there, I mean, I think, was it 43% of clubs, because from this survey, would describe their facilities as very poor or moderate in terms of the pitches themselves. 55% of clubs don't own the facilities, and a number of that, like within that, they only have security for more than 1 year, so they don't have they don't have a real home, a real base. And even people talk about traditionally why football has fared poorly. I mean, it's pointed out here that 25% of clubs in the country can't apply for sports capital grants because they don't qualify for the criteria.
We'll talk about that, because that's really interesting when you outline that first figure of the amount of clubs who actually own their facilities, but even the amount of clubs who have such little certainty as to their long-term future in their current location.
Yeah, they don't really have a secure home, and as a result, I mean, I think to be fair, a complaint within government would be, and this has been touched on in recent weeks, probably around betting tax and other issues, is that it's not that there hasn't always been a will to give money to football, it's that often they come with a pretty shabby case when they try and present, and there's a number of reasons for that. I mean, I suppose and other sports are just better organised. That could be like more skilled people on their committees. It could be more, I suppose, from the Gaelic Games perspective. I don't quite have the figures in front of me here, but I mean, the report does outline across, I think, 2000 to 2022 in terms of sports capital funding, there's a quite substantial difference.
Well, the GEA have received 431 million between 2000 and 2022. Football has received 188 million. Rugby 53 million. Rugby's turnover is far ahead of where the FAI is, but like, considering football is leading the way in terms of participation.
Yeah, like participation would be key. Like rugby's obviously smaller, but the scope would be a bit smaller just in terms of participation numbers, and that would sort of make sense. But there would be quite a substantial difference there. I mean, listen, part of that can bring you into a broader debate around the sports capital funding and how it's handled generally.
Well, even there it says Ireland is one of only 5 EU countries that since 2001 has had an average spent less than 0.5% of total government expenditure on sport.
Yeah, no.
So we spend less than everybody else to start with.
Yeah, and listen, it's true. You'll have like the GAA, for example, who the people can quite reasonably point out like they've spent a lot of their own money on sports, but they've obviously had government funding as well for like big projects and smaller projects. But I suppose they're not trying to compete with 55 other nations, in UEFA, where there's significant professional infrastructure at all levels, and like this is part of the issue here. Like I suppose football, like there's a broader thing as well, the cultural view of sport in this country. Like we have a great culture of volunteerism, which is like it underpins most codes, and in football that is equally so as much as anywhere else. But I suppose in terms of where you're trying to get to and where you're trying to compete, it's just not fit for purpose under any of the criteria that exist. And even for some people, the principle of like government putting money into this, maybe they're not 100% sure about it. But then you look at you look at the recent debate around, I suppose, horse racing and greyhound racing. There's arguments about government investment based on what happens elsewhere. And you look at football. I mean, you look at football in other countries, central government funding is quite substantial. And as you point out, football probably hasn't been very good at pointing out about the health benefits and the overall value. I think there's been a very narrow view of football in this country, which part of it comes from almost this belief of team qualifies for tournament. Irish football's in great health. Team doesn't qualify for tournament. What's going wrong? And like that's we existed off that in a point of history where you could actually look at things in that narrower focus, but it actually kicked the can down the road and a lot of stuff that has eventually caught up with us.
Well, I would have, and when we spoke about participation and the controversy around the GAA a few weeks ago, I was making the point that it's such a benefit for the GAA that they're in control of everything. There is no end goal where you're competing with countries around the world. And Ireland, we do have a debate about the lack of players in the Premier League, the lack of players in the Championship, and we almost judge our success as a footballing nation on that and don't talk at all about the high participation levels in the integration or celebrate that side of it at all. Where are they going to get the money from?
Yeah, so this is the nobody issue really, isn't it? It's like, as you've mentioned, like 60% from central government, which is 517 million euros across the period of time, and there's a 20% from local government, local authorities, and 20% from the FAI's wing, which is, or there's two elements to this. The FAI section, they're talking about setting up a new foundation that will manage this, which will be independent. There's transparency reasons for that, I suppose, given the FAI's history, just so people have full confidence. They have an independent wing that will actually manage this, where the money goes, and that's to be established. But I suppose the main part of this is the 60% that comes from government, the 517 million. Within that does include like existing schemes that exist, like the sports capital funding, the large scale infrastructure funding. I suppose they're looking for increased amounts from within that. I suppose part of this is having better projects to go through the process with that. But I suppose maybe the more interesting stuff is the additional sources of funding. There's references to things like the Shared Island Fund, the Brexit Adjustment Reserve, which is a funding route that exists for industries that have been affected by Brexit. Their argument here would be football has been affected significantly because we basically used to outsource player production, and now we are responsible for it really in the key years of 16 to 18, and that's where probably the 140 million on League of Ireland Academies comes in. And then there is a reference, of course, to the betting tax, which is, I suppose, been a thorny issue in the last 4 to 6 weeks, I suppose. And they are probably going out there and saying for sure that they are recommending an increase in the betting levy from 2% to 3%, even though I suppose the discussion of this generally has spun around, well, where does this betting tax for money really go?
Let's hear then from Roy Barrett on a couple of those issues. So firstly, this is Roy Barrett answering a question from Gav Cooney, basically just on how confident he is that they'll get the money they're looking for, particularly from the government.
I suppose any government funding for anything, but particularly sport, is always kind of going to be emotional, and people will have an emotive view, whatever sport they're from. What we've sought to do, and the team have sought to do over the last 18 months or so, since we've been putting this document together and all parts and components of it, is really take the emotion out of it and actually say, okay, at a point in time, everybody has a view that the facilities are poor, for whatever aspect of the game. Our role has been to do an audit of those to see where we are, how far the deficit is in terms of the existing facilities, and against the backdrop of a rising population over the next 15, 20 years, which is forecast to be 20% plus or so, against a backdrop where we have a very young population, like 26% of our population are less than 20. And against all those things, we have a sport which has been chronically underinvested for a long period of time. If that underinvestment continues, we're going to have all sorts of problems given the growth in the sport, the relative size of the sport, and the demographics, and the change in the demographics would indicate that the demand for football and football facilities is just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So against that backdrop, are we confident that we will get funding? I'm certainly confident that we should get funding, and I think part of the report also, we're not in isolation. Like, we're a sport of many sports, and I suppose part of our argument is to say, okay, well, what's happened over the last 20 years, and over the last 20 years as a country, we've underspent in sport. Okay, we're about half of what other countries have done, and we're down at the bottom tier of countries which have invested in sports as a whole. Our argument would be there should be more investment in sport, given the demographics, and as the largest sport, we have the greatest need, and that's historical, but also what we see into the future. So we think we should get the funding, and we think we've got a good case to argue that we will get the funding.
It certainly sounded as though Roy Barrett did make a very strong case there. There was no mention of the elite side of the game at all. This was based on the facts of the way the country is going, the demographics of the country, the amount of people who are going to be coming into the country. For so many of them, football will be their first sport. It might be their first outlet into Irish life, and that the government needs to start recognising that.
Yeah, no, it was. And I think also as well, though, they were stressing that there would be a multi-sport element to these facilities too. That, like, I think that's a point that people have probably raised and thinking, hang on, is football looking for all of this for itself? What about everyone else? And that's understandable, but I think that's a crucial point as well, that they are talking about shared facilities within this too. It's not a sort of an isolationist, it's just give this money to football.
So is there an element of this report that it's not necessarily what's in the report, it's even just the fact that this report has been put to paper, that the government excuse and the attitude within government, that when we talk about money for football, as you say, the attitude was, well, where's the plan? So if the GEA come looking, they come with a fully formulated plan, football come go, give us a bit of that. Whereas now, when those conversations happen over the next 5-10 years, the FAI can point and go, we have given you the numbers, we have shown you that if money is going to the GEA for facilities, we need to be in on that. These need to be municipal facilities, they need to be shared facilities, there needs to be an opportunity for that money to go and benefit football as well. Yeah,
and I suppose that's probably even more pronounced in the grassroots end of it in particular, when you're talking about like the regional hubs, like community hubs. I mean, that's part of it. Like they've divided the country sort of into eight sections. Within each of those 8 sections, they want one really high quality centre, and then 4 smaller ones within it, and sort of it spins out from that into smaller numbers as you go down, and that's something that, to be fair, like GEA is way down the road with this stuff. I was driving to a game and thinking Derry recently, and you pass like the Monaghan Centre of Excellence on a road, and you see them in various parts of the country. They're very down the road with that. I mean, football has struggled chronically with this over the years, and is trying to develop something in every area for someone. Like, the argument, I think, is that within 30 minutes of every kid there should be some kind kind of decent sized facility. So again, as I said, in that section it's more facts. I suppose when you move up to the League of Ireland side of things, then okay, the extent to which all these facilities would be shared, you can debate that. I mean, it will depend. Like Tallaght Stadium has been used for other sports at various times, but I think it's particularly in the training facilities and the grassroots facilities that it's very much a case of this is sort of laying down a framework that others can probably come in it.
You mentioned the League of Ireland then. What is in this report that could help develop the League of Ireland?
I mean, yeah, like the League of Ireland aspect of it. I mean, I suppose like what I probably like about the report is that it doesn't sugarcoat the reality, and I think this has probably been a big problem with the FAI. Going back to the previous decade, where it was trying to tell everyone that everything was sort of fine, really. It just lays out how terrible the stadiums are, and there's no way of disguising it. And basically speaking about how it's an obstacle to development, it's an obstacle to creating any kind of functioning industry here, which could actually generate some employment and offer opportunities for young players. So they lay out there's two strands, as I sort of mentioned, that the academy development is one side, and the other side is League of Ireland stadiums, and the vision is that by the end of the 15 years that you will have around half the stadiums in the country in the 10,000 to 20,000 bracket in terms of capacity, and then the rest up to 6,000. But I suppose,
is that realistic?
I see that stuff to me, right? I think you can definitely get bogged down in the weeds of that stuff and debate it and go, I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure that's massively relevant to the bigger picture debate of securing the funding, and I'd be sceptical about aspects of that, of course. Like, look how expensive Dalymount has proved to be, and that's only one stadium. But they would argue, well, that to flip the pitch, that's a particularly complex project where it's located. They will point out in some places, like, I actually think the shorter term stuff is a little bit better, on about in the 5 years, a new main stand in every ground, or something pertaining to that, a grass pitch everywhere, obviously the place is more relevant than others, and just maybe more manageable targets, that sort of outline, okay, this is quite clear. Now in some places, as pointed out, these projects are in train already, Finn Harps, Sligo Rovers, Shamrock Rovers and others, Dalymount.
It does need to be ambitious though, because again it does outline in pretty stark numbers where football is. They outline the top 40 stadiums in the country, and 3 of them are football stadiums. One of them is obviously the Aviva, but in terms of capacity, the next 2 are 38th, Tallaght, 39th, Turner's Cross. So there's 37 stadiums ahead of them in terms of capacity. So to be sitting here getting a 10,000 seater stadium might be stretching it.
Yeah, and it's easier to make the case now when like crowds, grounds have been full many times this year. It's clear it's stunting development. It's harder to make that case if they're all half full all the time. But again, I suppose it's more a case of establishing the principle that you need to recognise that these facilities are important. And that's been a challenge to even to plant that seed with aspects of the football community here. Like, how important is this? There was resistance at various stages to putting the third stand into Tallaght. The attendances wouldn't be, you go there regularly now. It's a much better facility. The benefits are the women's team play there. 21 internationals can be there, and you want to be able to move these things around the country potentially, but you can't do it actually because the facilities are embarrassing. You talk about bringing and people might want to bring the women's team around the country. You can bring them to Cork, sure, and even then, Turner's Cross isn't perfect, but where else do you go at a certain level? So if you wanted to have an underage tournament here, you can't do that really in a proper sense. So and
every other country is doing it. It's outlined in this that every other country in Europe, now again, there's lots of different reasons that they have a very different structure around their leagues, around how investment comes from TV rights that just doesn't exist.
There's some dictatorships in there, effectively, harder to point to.
Azerbaijan, we may not get to that level.
Russia has built a lot of stadiums. Well, okay. But it's establishing the principle that this is important that you do it. And some people, need convincing. of that at various times. And I think this is why some of the detail around will the stadiums end up at this size, will that materialise, that may not prove technically to be the case, but is there a basis there for starting work on certain places? I mean, the academy stuff in particular, there's no reason really why you shouldn't be trying to advance the argument of every club having its own training facility. Like that's something that provides a benefit to a lot of people potentially, and that to me that's a business case that you can present and say, well, here's what we need, here's what we can do with this. I appreciate some of the other stuff is more complicated, and definitely you could pick away at some of the figures around, say, we know how long it takes to get stuff done in this country. I'm not sure if some of these targets can be realised in that area, but you have to aim for them.
In terms of the international side of it, then it's not a huge amount of money, but what's the area of focus there?
I mean, it's actually very straightforward. I mean, you could argue that the international side, I'm not sure if where you would rank it in terms of being the most pressing relative to some of the other stuff we've raised, but it probably is the most manageable one because it's actually quite straightforward. It's like based in one area. I mean, the FAI are based in Abbottstown, but the report points out that of the three, I suppose, major codes, they're the only one that doesn't really have a proper national training centre. Like the national training centre they even put it in quotation marks themselves, as though the definition of it is questionable, because they don't actually have proper changing room facilities there. Like our underage international teams, the 18 or so that we have, they have pitches there, but they don't really have anywhere to train.
Right.
They don't have
because every time you drive out to Abbottstown, it's more and more impressive. There's a new facility, there's more pitches, there's a new building with state-of-the-art infrastructure around it, but you drive past all that and then you get to the FAI. Is that what they're saying?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, like, no changing rooms for international standard players, no high performance facilities or medical facilities, no fit for purpose education and development facilities, very poor playing surfaces, zero security infrastructure, a single reclaimed container acting as a makeshift room for the player analysis team. So
don't want to be getting ahead of ourselves, Dan.
No, and I mean,
keeps people grounded.
Again, I suppose because this is on one site and the land is there, again, there's a front loading of this that you could do. I think it's something like 35 million of that in the first 5 years, they argue. And like you see, the international team, we'd be there, you'd see them arrive off the bus changed, already. Like there's not a huge amount there, and again, like, it's not fit for purpose, and that is the international element of it. I mean, some people would prefer the concept of having a national academy full stop, where we do all the post-Brexit stuff, and that's not on the agenda. They are going to push with the clubs and spreading it regionally around the place, but that's the international aspect pretty much. That's probably the most straightforward. In
26 million to build a national football centre, FIFA quality 4G pitches by 3, including one potential dome, 5.5 million. So the dome that is out in Abbottstown at the moment, where the Irish rugby team train, the FAI don't have access to that. Well,
no, I presume you can rent facilities out there if you want to use them. I mean, there are pitches out in Abbottstown that teams might have arrangements with Sport Ireland to try and use them or whatever it might be. But in terms of actually having your own home, your own actual base, the argument is that they need one, that they don't have one. So that's probably, as I said, like there's something like 2,500 projects in this here, up to that amount. But I suppose that is slightly more, the focus to that is more narrow and more straightforward than the other ones. But again, I mean, they're all pressing. Actually, I'm not even sure about ranking them. All of them need to be addressed. I mean, this is why this whole presentation is overdue. And I think what's interesting is that the football community is a fairly cranky one, as we know, and probably quite divided as well, for many historical reasons. And I even think of the strategy plan when it came out, I think people were probably more of a mind to chip away at it, because there was areas of it that were a little bit unsatisfactory. But I think with this one, you can see people are generally going, no, this is a good plan. It's actually a decent document. You can definitely pick away aspects of it, but we can get on board with this, and probably that in itself is a bit of an achievement.
And they have outlined that funding model of where they would like to get the money from. So 34.5 million per annum from the government through a variety of different schemes. 11.5 million through football, which includes FIFA, UEFA, direct FAI investment, private investment as well via the Ireland Football Facility Fund. Local project partners, another 11.5 million, so that'll be local authorities with match funding, local health authorities, educational bodies. So they have divided this up into, I think Roy Barrett used the term there about it being a motive, that at times if we talk about the health benefits of sport, but the second you then associate giving money to sport from the health budget, people get very upset about that. But actually, if this is going to grassroots and the government is funding in different ways high performance, maybe that's a way for the FAI to get access to all this money.
Yeah.
Was there any sense as to how much they actually think they're going to get?
No, I mean, and I think that point is probably addressed. Like, is this a negotiation? And I suppose all these things probably are. Like, I mean, I suppose the FAI, I mean, they do have. They have Robert Watt on their board. They have people there who probably have an idea of the lie of the land and what's going on. And I saw last week Cork City were all in with Micheál McGrath. I was looking at public expenditure and all the departments they're probably trying to hit. I don't know. Like that's a tough one to answer. I mean, we are coming into a time where there's a budget surpluses are being debated. A big part of that is infrastructure, leaving a legacy. Again, there's an acknowledgement probably haven't been good at doing this in the past as a country. There is an election around the corner. You can't get away from that. You see what's happening today, like Sinn Féin straight away, not saying much around the betting tax stuff, but they're coming to life on this. I think Labour have as well too. People are probably of a mind to say, okay, if there is a surplus there, and we're talking about building something that leaves a lasting legacy, lasting foundations, that you can have the debate. I don't know. Like, I mean, the government aspect of it, people probably hear 863. I suppose the government aspect is 517. There is obviously the local element of it will have state funds attached to that. But you break it down, that averages around 34 per year. I mean, you have to go back to the horse and greyhound racing thing to some degree. You can't help but go there. I mean, they went there themselves today.
Well, let's hear on that then. So Tony O'Donoghue from RTE asked Roy Barrett the question about the FAI, and I guess the FAI and the betting tax, and I guess the way that story developed over the last few weeks.
We haven't been critical of any sport, actually. So, and and just like this document, when you try to look at a particular issue, we try to, in terms of the amount of work that's gone into this document. When we look at something like the betting tax, is that we try to take a fact-based approach to a funding stream that has been there for the last 22 years or so for two other sports. Okay, and rather than being emotive about it, is actually say, okay, well, let's look at this and let's look what has happened and why it happened. So the reality is, for those two sports, there's been 1.6 billion put into those sports as investment. The original genesis of it was the betting tax. The reason the betting tax was put in place was this concept of a free rider, i.e. Betting companies were benefiting off the content of horse and dog racing, and that this new fund and the betting levy was directed to those two sports to compensate for the fact that all the bets were being placed, let's say theoretically, on horse and dog racing at that time. So that's fine. So what's happened though over the last 20 odd years is that the betting levy and the funds raised has just increased at a time when the proportion of those bets has changed, and close to 40% of them come from football. So I think it's an absolutely reasonable question to ask, is that if the original basis of the legislation was one thing, that if you apply it today, then football and other sports should benefit from it. But we haven't criticised other sports, and actually, if you look at our report, what we do say is that, well, listen, this has been here for 20 odd years. It is what it is. So what we would suggest is just increase the betting levy from 2% to 3%, and then in doing that, other sports, including football, could benefit from the increased yield from betting levies. So it's no, we're not trying to say pit ourselves against other sports or say that we should be taking off them. That's not what we said. That's not what the report says. And what it says is we've got a low betting levy, increase it, other sports can benefit, and then when I look at it from a football perspective, that would be and would represent a significant amount of permanent funding for the game, which would help finance part of what we're trying to do here. So and part of the reason as to why we looked at that in particular was, it's one thing saying we need loads of money, okay, and we need loads of money to invest in the game. Well, that may be fine, but come up with some sensible suggestions as to how that can be raised. That's one.
So that was Roy Barrett there talking about the betting levy. So they're not saying they want a slice of the current pie, they want to make the pie bigger. Yeah, and that was always in the report, the report they commissioned. I mean, they weren't, this was the point, it was a sort of an analysis of sports funding and highlighting. And look, it went a particular way because the amounts that have been directed towards horse and greyhound racing are so significant. And naturally, you look into it, the greyhound racing one in particular now might be even more motive, like 18 million a year or so. Put that against 34 million per year. It doesn't seem daft, really, does it? The football ask. Now, it spun out a debate, and it spun out a debate around, the government attempt to say, well, this money doesn't go to horse greyhound racing, the betting income money. Yet there's loads of stuff out there which shows that it informs the picture. And I think this is part of it. Like, football is, there's no doubt that, betting on football does bring money to society. This is our argument for saying maybe give us some money, that would benefit society. That's the FAI's push on it. They've obviously publicly probably got not very far with it. The idea of raising the betting levy, how realistic is that? There's probably going to be a pushback on that from certain sectors in the bookmaking industry as well. But horse racing have argued for this before. They've called for the increase in the betting levy for whatever reason. They obviously felt it would benefit them. So I've always felt football's entitled to make its argument here. But it may well be that they end up technically getting nothing from the betting tax, but I suppose it helps their argument for getting more funds from the exchequer, which isn't really coming from the betting tax, or is it? Which is basically how it operates now with regard to horse and greyhound racing too. Declan Lynch used to have that great line about the FAI, it's the dysfunctional sporting body that other dysfunctional sporting bodies call the Galacticos. The trust of the FAI within government circles now, is this a line in the sand? Yeah, I mean, and see, that's a massive issue. There's no doubt. Like, you see any discussion you have about the FAI now, bet there's loads of comments in along those lines. And I mean, the FAI is basically like established as a punchline in a lot of people's mind, and it's a challenge to change that, and that's within football as well too. And let's be honest, it's not undeserved, based on history, and the Declan Lynch line was valid, related to a long-standing history of bumbling errors. I mean, that's why we're in this position. Like, Ireland qualified for multiple, by scale, quite a lot of major tournaments in a short period of time, at a time when political establishment was falling over itself for football, and effectively did nothing. Like, left very little legacy. There was a legacy about maybe more people playing the country and being inspired in parts of the country. Like, people talk about Shane Long and Kevin Doyle and all this. But in terms of actually places for them to play and develop, that wasn't really on the agenda. And it's hard. It might take a generation to shake that. And that's why the FAI was talking about renaming itself at various times and trying to rebrand itself in various ways. But I think the big thing that probably the FAI needs to do now is to divorce the debate around football funding with the image of the FAI administrator. Like, to so many people, football in Ireland is the picture of the FAI, and who's the CEO or who's the international team manager, rather than, and I think this is what they're trying to do, and it's probably quite effective. It's, football is the people who play it. Like, football is the people who try and go and watch it. Football is the new communities that are coming in who love the game. Like, football is not just people who go to like League of Ireland games, also people who want to go and watch Manchester United and the Aviva. It all comes from like a
a love of football in some shape or form, and that's the argument for state funding into this pursuit, and try and professionalise it and make an industry around it as well. Whereas too often it's been seen through the eyes of the FAI, but of course, look, they fed that cult of personality themselves, and the damage lingers on, the debt lingers on.
There was a reduction in the debt announced today?
The AGM this year, they're suggesting it's going to be down to 44 million from 63, but there's no doubt that the FAI's ability to come up with its portion of this is complicated by things like that. But again, this is where this new foundation and getting maybe donations or however that work,
because is part of this taking the FAI away from that sort of boom or bust cycle of everything being on qualifying for the big tournament?
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that will help if they do, but I mean, they have to get away from that. And as I said, like, some people will only see football in these terms, and I mean, there is no doubt. I mean, you can't deny the fact, though, if you qualify for a tournament and the way prize money is going up, it might even increase in value qualifying for a competition. A competition could be like 15 million out of nowhere, and of course you'll have deductions for bonuses and all sorts of things, but still, that really helps if you're trying to come up with X amount per year. But that, again, like, the reason Ireland ended up in that boom and bust cycle is because it had no functioning infrastructure to speak of. It had nothing. The only people that are employed full-time in football in the country were only working for the FAI, and there was no real, it was just too reliant on it. I mean, and like, as we know, Ireland qualified for tournaments and the money was splurged anyway. But this is it. It's about building something that has foundations from the bottom up, so that, yes, if you don't qualify for a tournament, well, that's bad, but you actually do have training centres around the country and academies around the country, which should mean that over the round of like a 20-year period or a 30-year period, you should qualify for more than you don't qualify for. And that's where you have to get to. Like, we are still a small country, we are still going to miss out on competitions, but you just have to get to a place where we're not reliant on like the magic of a manager coming in and recruiting players through eligibility rules and hoping at a particular point in history this comes together. You actually have to take a little bit more control of your own destiny, and I think this is part of that.
Well, we'll talk about Ireland controlling their own destiny for this qualification campaign a lot next week. It is 8 days away?
Yeah.
From Republic of Ireland against Greece in Athens, and then at home against Gibraltar. We'll have full live commentary of that game on the Monday night. They're in Turkey at the moment. You're heading over. There's a training camp.
Yeah, in Antalya, a warm weather training camp, as they call it. I was looking at the forecast. They're meant to have thunderstorms and stuff. The forecast got a little bit better. I was thinking,
this is typical FAI, isn't it? They go all the way to Turkey and it's bloody warmer back here.
And like the Stephen Kenny era is just stepping on rakes. Like, the warm weather training camp called off because of thunderstorms. The forecast looks okay. Now it's improved. So they've been there since Monday, and they're basically spending, I think, 9 days in total in Antalya, and sort of flying into Athens, and almost their trip to Greece is a normal length one in terms of just getting in 2 days before and playing the game. So yeah, I mean, there was no dropout to the squad once they named it, which is decent enough. And yeah, I mean, this game has probably been sketched into our minds mentally for quite a long time, and the nature of the year is such that you have one game against France in March with a 3-month build up, one game against Greece in June with a 3-month build up, and then it's a little bit of a sprint later in the year by comparison, but it's upon us.
Yeah. All right, we shall talk to you plenty more about that next week. Great stuff, Dan.
Thank you.